Welcome to ChapterCast, where you can grab your favorite snack, fold some laundry, or kick back and learn while we unpack the science of behavior, one chapter at a time. Today, we're diving into one of the most debated and misunderstood areas in behavior analysis: positive punishment procedures and the ethics of punishment. Now don't worry, this isn't about being harsh. It's about understanding why and when punishment procedures are used, how they differ from reinforcement, and what ethical safeguards ensure that we protect the dignity and well-being of every individual we serve. We'll explore real-world examples, research foundations, and ethical decision-making frameworks that guide responsible practice in the ABA field. Let's break down the science behind positive punishment and the ethics that must always come first. Have you ever had to stop a bad habit? Think about a common, frustrating moment. A young child keeps drawing on the freshly painted living room wall with a bright red crayon. The parent, seeing the new artwork, hands the child a bucket of soapy water and a sponge, instructing them to clean not just their drawing but the entire wall. The child does not enjoy this task. It is boring and tiring. The next day, when the child thinks about drawing on the wall again, the memory of scrubbing makes them choose paper instead. This simple, real-life example shows the core of positive punishment. It demonstrates how adding an unpleasant consequence can make a behavior much less likely to happen again in the future. This concept is more than just a parenting trick. It is a fundamental principle in behavior modification that shows up in our daily lives, schools, therapeutic settings. Understanding how it works is crucial, but understanding when and if to use it is even more important. The decision to use punishment carries significant weight because it directly involves creating an unpleasant experience for someone. Therefore, we must approach this topic not just with an interest in its effectiveness, but with a deep and abiding concern for the well-being, dignity, and safety of the individual whose behavior we hope to change. This is a tool that requires careful thought before application. The reason this topic matters so much is that the line between effective discipline and causing harm can be thin. When used incorrectly, without proper safeguards, or without considering the emotional impact, positive punishment can create fear, anxiety, and resentment. It can damage the relationship between a teacher and a student, a parent and a child, or a therapist and a client. Because of these potential risks, many professionals argue that it should only be considered after all other, more positive methods have been tried and have failed. The goal is not merely to stop a behavior, but to do so in the most humane and constructive way possible. In this exploration, we will carefully unpack the mechanics of positive punishment, following a clear structure that moves from basic definitions to real-world examples, and, most critically, to the ethical considerations that must guide our every step. We will use a hook example ethics ladder approach, starting with relatable scenarios explaining the underlying principles and then climbing to the highest rung, the ethical framework that ensures we act responsibly. Our journey will be guided by simple language and a neutral perspective, aiming to make this complex subject easy to understand for everyone. The ultimate goal is to empower you to stop, think, and then apply these principles wisely and ethically. Let's begin by establishing a clear definition. In the language of behavior analysis, the word positive can be a little misleading. It does not mean good, it does not mean pleasant. Think of it like a plus sign in a math equation. It means something is being added. Punishment refers to any consequence that causes a behavior to decrease in frequency. Therefore, positive punishment means adding an unpleasant stimulus or event immediately after a behavior. That makes the behavior less likely to happen in the future. The child who had to clean the wall had an unpleasant task added. That made drawing on the wall decrease. It is essential to distinguish this from negative punishment. Both aim to reduce a behavior. Negative punishment works by taking away something desirable. For example, if a teenager misses their curfew, a parent might take away their phone privileges for a week. In this case, a pleasant item, the phone, is removed. This is done to decrease the behavior of missing curfew. Positive punishment, by contrast, adds an unpleasant experience. An easy way to remember the difference is to ask, was something added? Was something taken away? This distinction is critical because the ethical implications of adding an aversive event are often more complex than those of removing a privilege. The term aversive is central to understanding this concept. An aversive stimulus is anything a person finds unpleasant. An aversive stimulus is anything a person finds uncomfortable. An aversive stimulus is anything a person wishes to avoid. What is aversive can be highly individual. For one child, extra math problems might be extremely aversive. For another who enjoys math, it might not be. The effectiveness depends on whether the consequence added is genuinely aversive to that individual. The goal is not to cause pain, it's to introduce a disliked consequence, just strong enough to make them think twice. There are two broad categories of positive punishment. First, punishment by application of aversive activities. Second, punishment by application of aversive stimulation. Punishment by aversive activities involves making the person engage in a low-probability behavior. A low-probability behavior is a task they would not choose to do on their own. Our wall-scrubbing example falls into this category. Punishment by aversive stimulation involves presenting an unpleasant physical sensation. For example, a loud noise, or a spray of water mist. Punishment by the application of aversive activities requires an individual to perform a task they find unpleasant as a consequence for an undesirable behavior. Several specific techniques fall under this umbrella. One of the most common is contingent exercise. The person must perform an exercise unrelated to the problem behavior. Example: a coach makes a student run an extra lap for unsportsmanlike conduct. The exercise is contingent upon, meaning it depends on, the bad behavior. The extra lap is a disliked activity meant to reduce that conduct. Another technique is guided compliance, used when someone refuses a reasonable request. The adult physically guides the person to complete the task. Example: a parent gently guides a child's hands to pick up toys. Physical guidance is mildly aversive for most people. The goal is the child learns to comply to avoid guided prompts. Overcorrection has two parts: restitution and positive practice. Restitution: correct the environmental effects and make things better than before. Example: put a knocked-over desk back and straighten all other desks. This links the consequence directly to the misdeed. Positive practice: repeatedly practice the correct behavior. Example: a child who runs in the hallway walks back and then walks correctly 3 times. Repeated correct practice is aversive, but builds the desired habit. Moving beyond aversive activities, we encounter punishment by the application of aversive stimulation. This category involves presenting an unpleasant physical stimulus following a behavior. Examples can range from relatively mild things, like a spray of water mist to the face, or a startling but harmless sound, to more intense and highly controversial punishers like a mild electric shock. The shock is only ever considered in extreme, clinically supervised cases for life-threatening behaviors. Because these procedures deliver a physically unpleasant sensation, they are considered much more intrusive and carry far greater ethical scrutiny than aversive activities. They are rarely used and require extensive oversight. Another important technique, which functions slightly differently, is response blocking. This procedure involves physically intervening as soon as the person begins to engage in the problem behavior, to prevent its completion. For instance, if a child has a history of hitting their head against a wall, a trained staff member might gently block their head with a soft pad as they move it backward. The block prevents the behavior from being completed and can be aversive. It is often used for dangerous behaviors where preventing the action is critical for safety. While it is a form of physical intervention, its primary goal is to interrupt the behavior chain before harm can occur. Similarly, physical restraint is a procedure that involves holding a person to restrict their movement. This is not the same as response blocking. Restraint is used when a person's behavior poses an immediate danger to themselves or others, such as during a violent outburst. Physical restraint is an emergency procedure, not a planned punishment to reduce a future behavior. It is a temporary safety measure. However, because being restrained is aversive, its application can sometimes have a punishing effect, reducing the likelihood of such outbursts in the future. Its use is strictly regulated and requires significant training to ensure safety and prevent injury. Restitution, which we touched on with overcorrection, can also be seen as a standalone punishment procedure. In simple terms, restitution means paying back for a loss. If a teenager carelessly breaks a neighbor's window while playing ball, a restitutional consequence would be for the teenager to use their own money or do chores to earn the money to pay for the window's repair. This adds the aversive consequence of losing money or time, directly linking the punishment to the natural outcome of the behavior. It teaches responsibility by requiring the person to make amends for the damage they caused, which can be a powerful and logical lesson. One of the most important ethical principles guiding the use of any behavioral procedure is the concept of positive punishment as a last resort. This idea is part of a broader framework known as the principle of least restrictive intervention. This principle states that professionals and caregivers have an ethical obligation to use the mildest, least intrusive, least restrictive methods that are likely to be effective before moving on to more restrictive or aversive options. It creates a hierarchy of interventions, starting with the most positive and gentle approaches first. Punishment, especially positive punishment, sits at the top of this hierarchy as the most restrictive option. Before even considering a punishment procedure, a series of other steps must be tried. The first step is always to try reinforcement-based strategies. Praise rewards other positive consequences to increase desirable behaviors that can compete with the problem behavior. For example, instead of punishing a child for shouting out in class, a teacher should first implement a plan to heavily praise and reward them for raising their hand. Often, strengthening a positive behavior is enough to make a negative one fade away without ever needing to use punishment. Kinder teach valuable skills, build positive relationships. If reinforcement strategies alone are not sufficient, the next step might be to try less intrusive forms of punishment, such as response cost, timeout, both forms of negative punishment. Response cost involves taking away a specific amount of a reinforcer, like losing tokens, losing points. Timeout involves removing the person from a reinforcing environment for a brief period. These methods are generally considered less restrictive than positive punishment, because they involve removing something pleasant, rather than adding something unpleasant. Only when these safer, less aversive methods have been implemented correctly and proven ineffective should one even begin to contemplate the use of positive punishment. This last resort rule exists for several critical reasons. It protects the individual from unnecessary discomfort, risk distress. It pushes practitioners to be more creative and thorough in their application of positive skill-building strategies. It also acknowledges the potential for negative side effects associated with punishment, such as fear, aggression, avoidance. Using punishment should only be an option when the problem behavior is so severe, for instance, if it is causing serious physical harm to the person or others, that the risks of not intervening outweigh the risks associated with the punishment procedure itself. This is a high bar to clear. When a decision is made, positive punishment is a necessary last resort. Ethical considerations move to the forefront. The first and most non-negotiable ethical requirement is informed consent. This means that the individual undergoing the procedure, legal guardians or parents must give explicit permission before the plan is implemented. This is not just a simple yes. True informed consent, complete explanation, clear explanation, honest explanation in language they can understand. What the procedure entails, potential risks, potential benefits, alternative treatments tried. Consent must be voluntary, cannot be coerced or given under pressure. Right to refuse the procedure. Right to withdraw consent at any time without penalty. This is a fundamental protection of individual autonomy and rights. Consent process must ensure agreed goals, eliminate the behavior completely, reduce the behavior, positive replacement behaviors to be taught. Details must be part of the conversation. Person is a partner in the process, not just a subject of it. Beyond the formal process of consent, there is a deeper ethical duty to protect the person's dignity. Punishment procedures by their very nature can be demeaning, repetitive exercises, physical guidance. These can feel embarrassing or controlling. It is the responsibility of the person implementing the procedure to do so with the utmost respect for the individual, carry out the procedure in a calm manner, neutral demeanor, private setting when possible. It should never be done out of anger or frustration. Monitor and address emotional reactions with compassion. The goal is to change a behavior, not to shame or humiliate a person. To ensure these ethical standards are met, most professional settings require multiple layers of oversight. Review by a human rights committee, or an ethics review board. Board includes professionals from different fields, community members, advocates for the individual. To provide an unbiased assessment of the plan, they check that the procedure is justified, that less restrictive options have been exhausted, that consent is properly obtained, and that there are clear safety protocols in place. While positive punishment can reduce a behavior, it can come with hidden costs. One common cost is negative emotional reactions, fear, anxiety, anger. These feelings can extend to the person administering the punishment and the setting. A student punished often may start to fear the teacher and may come to dread going to school. These emotional responses can be more damaging than the original behavior. Another side effect is obvious avoidance, a child running away from a parent about to deliver punishment. Subtle avoidance. The person may learn to lie, hide, or become secretive. Instead of solving the problem, punishment can teach the person to be better at not getting caught. That breaks down trust and makes it harder to address the root cause. Punishment can also provoke aggression. Many species, including people, may fight back when faced with an aversive stimulus. Example, a physically guided child might try to hit the parent guiding them. Another example is an employee harshly reprimanded might later sabotage work or spread negative gossip. The person administering punishment can become a model for aggressive behavior. Finally, punishment does not teach what to do instead. Example, punish a child for grabbing a toy from a sibling. They might stop grabbing, but they still don't know how to ask for the toy politely. Without teaching a replacement skill, the person is left in a behavioral vacuum. Punishment should never be used in isolation. It must be paired with reinforcement for a desirable alternative behavior. This process is called differential reinforcement. Pair punishment with teaching and reinforcement to create lasting, positive change. Given the significant ethical concerns and potential side effects, it is clear why positive punishment must be a last resort. The good news is that there is a vast and effective toolkit of alternatives that should always be our first line of defense. The most powerful alternative is differential reinforcement. This is a family of procedures. Combine reinforcement for a desired behavior and extinction for the problem behavior. For example, in differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, you would systematically praise a child for tapping a person's shoulder to get attention, while ignoring them completely whenever they scream for attention. This teaches a valuable replacement skill while making the problem behavior ineffective. Another proactive strategy is antecedent manipulation. Change the environment or circumstances that exist before a behavior happens to make the problem behavior less likely. If a child consistently has a tantrum when it is time to leave the park, give a 5-minute warning, then a 2-minute warning before it's time to go. This makes the transition more predictable and less jarring. If students are too noisy during independent work, a teacher could change the seating arrangement or provide headphones. Often, preventing the problem from occurring in the first place is the easiest and kindest solution. Teaching new skills is another cornerstone of effective behavior change that does not require punishment. Many problem behaviors exist because the person lacks a more appropriate skill to achieve the same goal. A child who hits to get a toy may not know the words to ask for it. A person with social anxiety who avoids gatherings may not have the skills to initiate a conversation. Instead of focusing on stopping the negative behavior, focus on functional communication training or social skills training. By teaching a person how to communicate their needs and wants effectively, you empower them and make the problem behavior unnecessary. When a consequence is needed, negative punishment procedures are generally preferred over positive punishment. Timeout response cost. A well-implemented timeout involves briefly removing a child from a reinforcing environment to a safe, boring space. A response cost system might involve losing a token from a token board that can be exchanged for a prize later. These methods are still aversive. No one likes losing privileges or being removed from fun. But they do not involve adding an unpleasant physical or emotional experience. They must still be used carefully and paired with reinforcement, and they are considered a step down in restrictiveness from positive punishment. In summary, positive punishment is a principle of behavior change. It involves adding an aversive consequence after a behavior to decrease its future frequency. We have explored its two main forms: punishment by aversive activities, aversive stimulation. Specific techniques include contingent exercise, guided compliance, overcorrection, response blocking. However, the most critical lesson is not how these tools work, but the profound ethical responsibility of considering their use. That wraps up Chapter 18 from the Behavior Modification, Principles and Procedures textbook. If this walkthrough helped, give the video a like so other students can find it too. You can always use the timestamps to review key sections or head to the playlist to continue with the next chapter. Subscribe to ChapterCast for more chapter-by-chapter study guides, and let me know in the comments which concept you'd like broken down next. Thanks for learning with ChapterCast, where textbooks turn into study-friendly lessons. See you in the next video, where we break down Chapter 19, Promoting Generalization.